library. Quickly go over what I was trying to do and the environment in which I was trying to do it, as well as the problems I found and a couple of the findings that I did actually come up with despite the limitations. So, as most of you know, I'm interested in the intersection between formal and informal classification. There are a few systems out there that do this now, where it's social tagging of formally classified information, but they're still fairly immature systems. So Gary's suggestion was to take a look at the ACM Digital Library, and while it's not exactly the same, it's close enough that you could get kind of a sense for what's going on. So I propose to basically compare the keyword usage with the classifications of articles in the ACM Digital Library. So, brief note about the classification system. It was established initially in 1982. There's been 4 revisions. The last one was in '98, and it's the one they're still currently using. So the structure is fairly simple. It's a tree structure with 3 coded levels, and I'll show you the codes in a minute. And then the 4th level of uncoded subject descriptors. So here you can see the top level. There's 11 top level classes. And the classification is actually done not by a professional classifier, which is what you have in most classification systems, but by the authors themselves. Keyword assignment is also done by an author. The classifications, you're not limited to just one. You can have a primary and then secondary classifications. So keeping all of that in mind, I'll show you how to get there, so if you want to look at this yourself, you can. The classification is under the guide section. The ACM Digital Library is kind of 2 in 1. You know, there's the ACM part, which is the ACM related material, but there's also an index to a lot of other literature. That's what this guide is. And honestly, when I've done searches in both, they seem to have given me almost exactly the same results. So it'd be interesting to see why that is, but that was not this particular research question. Once you're in the guide, you get to go to this computer classification system, and again, here's our top 11, and you can browse through the links. So here's a good example of the different levels. So you've got H information systems, which most of our work will probably always fall there. The 2nd level and the 3rd level of user interfaces, and then here are all of the subject descriptor codes. Now, I decided that rather than try to look at everything, that would be a little too much for a semester project. I picked one particular subject descriptor to kind of focus on. And I picked Voice I/O because this was a new one that was added in the 1998 revision of the classification sequence. What I was hoping to do initially was to try to see if I could take what had been classified as Voice I/O and get a sense of the different subjects that were being classified and sort of go before 98 and see how they were classified before, how they were grouped, to see if there's any kind of pattern or what kind of usage you would see. But as I'll explain, that was a bit of a problem. Not very doable with the current system. So my data gathering tool is Otero. It's a Firefox plugin to do citation management. There's 2 reasons why I chose Otero. The first one was, and this is for my own personal use as well as for the project, I love this fact about Zotero, is that you can grab multiple citations at once. So if you go to a web page that has citation information in it, you'll get this nice little icon up here in the URL bar. You'll either get a folder for if there's multiple articles, or you'll get, like a little file icon if there's just one. And then if you click on it, then you get the option to pick which papers you want to put in. That was one of the big reasons why I wanted to use Otero. The second reason was that it captures the tags. So here's what it looks like when you get the articles in, and you've got both a sort of a tag dialog, so you can filter on multimodal and then take whichever tag you want to look at, and then you can see all the tags per articles. So that was a really useful feature for me that would allow me to do my data analysis. So this is where I hit my first stumbling block. Now, what I wanted to do was basically go down, browse to my subject, Voice.io, and then grab all those articles. There's currently 371 of those articles, but Zotero doesn't see it. And I posted this on the Zotero forums a couple of months ago, and I never got any kind of real response. I don't know if the limitation is on the ACM digital library, if there's something they're doing different in this display of information, or if it's a Zotero limitation, because here's what's funny to me anyway, it's funny. All I did was I went from this and then hit search. Because here, see here, there's this string, it's the classification string. So I hit search, and I get the best 200 results, and Zotero says, oh, I see them. But there's no real difference in the data that's actually showing up. So I'm really at a loss as to explain why there is a difference here. With this kind of analysis, you really want to get all of the data. You don't want to get just a sample, because then you're not really seeing the trends. With this particular subject descriptor, it wasn't as big of a deal in a sense, because there were only 371 originally, 200 here. I was able to get that up to 287 by sort of playing around with different search strings to pull up things that didn't hit this 200. But if you look at a sibling of Voice.io, the evaluation methodology, there's 2,200 articles. So this 200 is only a tenth of that, and I don't think that you can really do a trend analysis with that little data. So that's the big challenge of number one. Number two, getting the best data. Okay, I'm in a situation where I can't get it all, so let's get the best I can. There are 116 articles that are currently classified as Voice.io being the primary classification. But as I was monkeying around trying to expand that set of 200, I found that at least 25 of those articles didn't show up. They were primary classification, but the search on the string for the classification didn't bring those up. To me, that seems very strange, because you would expect that the best would include primary. But I played around, and I honestly couldn't tell you what the criteria is for best when searching on just the classification. So that's another sort of stumbling block to understanding really all the data that you can gather. One of the ways I was trying to, kind of as a side note, trying to get the other articles, so to speak, was to play with the year, because I was kind of interested in seeing usage patterns of keywords over time, and that doesn't seem to work. So I had to get kind of creative on my search strings to, yeah.
Can I quickly ask, what do you mean the search results? Are they like full text search?
This here, right here, that's the classification string. So the thing
okay,
was
so there's
that,
a special syntax for that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, because when I did the browse up here, when you click on this Voice.io thing, it fills in this string here, and but Zotero didn't see. So when all I did was hit search, and that gave me these 200 results. So it was kind of odd. It's been an adventure. And the last problem I'll maybe mention is getting classification data. As I said, you can classify an article with multiple classifications. Zotero doesn't see that information and doesn't grab it. It grabs the tag information, which is really, really useful, but it doesn't grab the classification. I had hoped that I could kind of trick it somehow, and the way I did that was there's another search string you can use to pull up those that are marked primary classification, and I grabbed those kind of as a separate thing and went in and manually added a tag in the Zotero system so that I would know which ones were marked primary and which ones weren't. But in order to understand the classification of all the articles, I would have to basically go into each article and manually add tags for each article, which is a bit of an undertaking. So a couple of results, some interesting things I did find. The most common keyword was speech recognition, 21 out of the 287. The interesting thing about this, of course, is that there already exists a classification for speech recognition. Now they tell you in the instructions for classifying articles, of course, you pick your classifications that are appropriate, and then you add in keywords that are not the classification strings, so that you can, supplement the search or finding aid. So I thought it was interesting that the most common one was a classification on its own. So it makes me wonder if there's like a gap between authors not understanding what it is they're supposed to be doing, or if there's sort of a difference, conceptual difference between their speech recognition and the speech recognition that is meant by this particular phrase. I don't think so. But
I mean, I a lot of these papers, and the last thing I ever want to do is to go into that stupid list and find something that might seem to apply. And so what I usually do is just grab something near the very top, like information systems, and maybe ECI or IR, and that's it. And I would, and I know I'm sort of in this field, so imagine most people how little they must care about this. I mean, it's such a nonsense hassle. Is the author's perspective on this?
But from the user's point of view, they're going to be interested in getting
But that's not the way the authors are thinking. That's an argument for professional indexers.
I think the authors are right, because I don't think people search by the classification system either. So why should I spend a lot of time looking for exactly the right classification codes? When people are going to throw speech recognition in the search engine.
Yeah, well, that's the thing that would be interesting to compare would be the usage from the author's point of view, and if you had the access to the search data, what users were entering, because I think if you had those two and you could combine them to come up with some really powerful stuff. But because I'm interested in sort of this concept formation, which is sort of, I guess, a meta level on just searching and finding. But to me, I think it's a real crucial part of our field, because it's such an emerging field. Is how do we develop what our field is, for example, the particular piece of the field, and how do we draw all of that together to form a field rather than isolated articles that talk about the same things, but since they don't use the same terminology, it becomes harder to put that together. So that's part of why I wanted to look at this, because I was hoping this could give me sort of an insight into how this happens, how this works. But the second one, finding that I wanted to talk about briefly, I think was actually more interesting. Multimodal interaction is the second most common. I had never heard of this phrase before I did this data analysis. There were several other instances of the word multimodal. And so I was curious about what was going on with this word. So I said, well, how many terms have multimodal? Isn't this a nice little peek here at 2002? Didn't it make you wonder, what happened in 2002? What happened in 2002? Well, first in 2000, you had a W3C voice browser group. They started trying to draw requirements for multimodal interaction. And then in 2002, you saw the launch of an actual working group on that topic. So that's kind of a clear indication of why. Yes?
What does multimodal mean?
Did you pay him to do that?
No, no. It seeks to allow users to dynamically select the most appropriate mode of their input and output, and the developers to provide the mechanisms to do that. So, for example, input could be speech, handwriting, or old-fashioned keystrokes. And then multimodal output would be things like displays or electronic ink or braille strips. For example, ink XML is one common term you find in relationship to multimodal interaction, because that's one of the languages that's being developed to talk about how to encode this. It's kind of an interesting little concept there. Not only does this allow for accessibility, but it's also sort of aimed at the mobile group, mobile GPS systems, cars, things like that. So what do I come to with all of this playing around with the system? There's a lot of stuff that nobody's doing anything with because it's hard to do anything with it. And why does it matter? Because I think that it really does get at the concept formation of the different subfields in our discipline, especially since they're changing fairly rapidly. The classification system is fairly stagnant, and there's no easy mechanism for updating it. It's just that every so often they get together and they sort of do it. And from the little bit I was reading, it was sort of like birthing a 50-pound rhinoceros, because it's just a painful process. So the key words are, of course, one easy way for you to get around that sort of limitation. So I think it's an interesting twist to look at, what is the official OK term and what people are actually using. Something that would be interesting to see would be if you could get the search data and sort of compare what are people searching with, what terms are they using, and are they finding these articles, and if they're able to go back and forth, is this actually building for people that are newer in the field, their concepts, or is it just a bunch of words that just kind of mean what they mean in individual contexts? I don't know. Comments? Questions?
I did find a paper on scraping the ACM digital library. I don't know if you found that or not. And I looked, and apparently ACM did provide them with data to do their research.
Okay.
This is a while ago, so it might have a stronger possibility of getting some of that data.
Yeah. I'd like to see that paper. Yes, ma'am.
Two questions. Zotero, now are you able to use that in conjunction with other types of databases like EBSCO or, okay, so it can
Yes. Yes.
and also, have you considered trying to do the same type of or investigation using a different kind of maybe bibliographic manager, or would that make a difference, and would it make it easier or anything like that?
I haven't actually looked into it a whole lot. I did have thought about it some, and I'm not really certain how to go about it, because the citation management tools aren't really geared toward things like keywords. They're there, but there's no easy way to do data analysis with it. I mean, in fact, Zotero, which is my data collection tool, is not my data analysis tool. I basically, I experimented with exporting to formats and then, used regular text processing in order to put together some numbers and figure out what was what. So I think that to do this for real, so to speak, it would probably be easiest to write tools in the database.
I guess I'm just thinking of my experience with RefWorks, and although I didn't really like it very much, there were some global edit features, and I was wondering if that might help you with sort of recoding and
That certainly would have been useful. That's, in fact, Zotero is actually still beta software, and one of the things that's on the list to do for future work is the edit feature, which would be really useful for this kind of thing, because doing it one by one is a pain. But the problem is that even if you could do it globally, so to speak, you still, with the way the ACM digital library works, you have to still go into each article and get the classification pieces. So